One of the most painful aspects about going round for round in heartbreak with the men in your life is that your creativity dies. It is why divorced women like Yali suddenly glow post breakup, but it is undeniable that her ex shined. I've long believed in destiny swapping or energy transfers, and it is not so far fetched. If all we are is energy, then even the things we give, like our list of likes, to a man, can build him to look cultured and worldly, while we become another form of cultured sour milk. We were hanging out with new acquaintances slash mild friends when all of a sudden he said, I love Almost Famous. That's my favorite film. I shot him a look, as if he had begun a game of Clue, and I was convinced that he was Colonel Mustard with a candlestick bashing me in. It was my favorite film, and he had just watched it with me last week. Yeah, the way he spoke about it, you would have thought he saw this with his father, and they had been watching it every Christmas since he was 9. I had shown him the soundtrack and divulged how much I love Led Zeppelin and think they are the best rock band ever, competing only with my love for Tame Impala, another band I had introduced to him. Hence, when he started to talk about how he has always been a fan of both, I was hoodwinked. He was trying to impress people with the things I liked without even acknowledging I introduced him to them. Yeah, Kevin Parker's a genius, he declared. Oh, God. He had only heard one song, and it was the Soul Wax version of Let It Happen. I felt stupefied and endangered because this is the tall tale sign that you are dating a loser who will take your identity like Leatherface would half of Texas. And it's so subtle. There's something so weird about little lies, especially if the more loving route is easy. Yeah, my girlfriend introduced me to them. I'm going to start listening to them more. What's so bad about that? There, he could have said that. Not this strange opus of how knowledgeable he was on the history of Kevin Parker, whom a few weeks ago he probably thought was just Kevin James, the lead actor of King of Queens. That night I questioned him, and true to his glass slider ways, he said, It's not a big deal. It's so stupid. Move on. If my father could have tattooed on his ass, Don't be stupid, move on, which in perspective, he actually could have, should have tattooed that in his ass. That was his favorite quote to appear lighthearted when someone realized he was being weird. Sure, necessary lies can make you look cooler. Lord knows I have said I have read books that I didn't. But it's relying on that those who know the truth will stay small and quiet and unthanked. One of the things I most admired about my dad, or at least the image he gave me, was that he appeared cultured. He was a music connoisseur and loved global history, even if he swore he traveled to the places he did not. He knew how to win people over by observing how they did not notice that they were better than him, and how much they enjoyed someone liking the things that they liked best. In essence, in an insecure world, he understood the power of interest. Yet he erased women, abandoning them after they bettered him enough in exchange for losing interest in themselves. Now, it takes me at least a good 15 minutes of listening to the slow rush before my brain stops trauma responding that ex's name. Even in my likes, I inspired someone that ended up making me feel so uninspired. It was very similar to what my dad did to my mom. After all, my father took money from my mom, but always claimed she taught him luxury. Hmm. All right, let's heal. Let's discuss. So, um, it's so stupid, but so I think her name, she's a famous Argentinian podcaster. She speaks in Spanish, but she's super funny. And I don't only want self-help that is about healing me. I also want self-help that is about me kind of fighting back and pushing back and knowing healing isn't always about closing up wounds and forgiving and releasing pain. It's also preventative, learning how to make boundaries, learning how to keep boundaries. And I think for me, what was so weird about that ex, and eventually we ended, was that kind of, I it's something that's going to come up in an upcoming episode, or I have so many episodes I forget. But it was this thing that happened of my friend was reading this book. I think like men from Mars date women from Venus. Like it's an emulation of the men are from Mars, women are from Venus book, but like it's specifically about dating. And he was The author was talking about how one of the failures of women in the dating world is that they love in service and men hire services, right? So it's this whole concept of we love via what we do for others, while men kind of enjoy more the chasing. They want to conquer. Very hunter gatherer mentality. Beyond whether or not that is true, I'm sure there is a level of truth to that, whether you like it or not. I think it is true for me in the sense of what I have said it before and I'll say it again. I have always resented how dumbed down I felt by my exes compared to how much I leveled them up in culture, in creativity. Cause I dated people that claimed they were artists while I actually was one. I had the talent, I had the creativity, but I didn't have the confidence. They had the confidence, but they didn't have the talent or creativity. And I think it's a side effect of JMS, John Mulaney syndrome, where you can be a great person with insecurities and not realize that those insecurities are attracting you or making you accept losers with big dreams. Because that was the thing about a lot of my exes. And I think that it goes back to my parent. And it doesn't necessarily have to be engendered, but it is for the most part because, my father had the privilege of being a man and he had the privilege of, he had the personality of a loser, but the privilege of being a man. And I say that because he caused loss. He was loss. He was, but we wouldn't say lost with an S, we would say lost with a T, right? And I open it up to genders because I really do think having an abusive parent, my God, I mean, you're launched into the world and it affects you in every way, and you just don't know how to pick right because the two people that you didn't pick, you wouldn't pick them on a lineup at all. You wouldn't pick them even for sports. Like you, it's just this weird thing of you were forced to love and behave and clean up after people that you would never choose and made you feel unchoosable, unpickable. And then you're off to a world where you have to make your own family, make your own friends, which are like some form of family, and learn boundaries. And it's like my whole childhood was learning how to not have boundaries. And suddenly I was launched into a world where I really needed them. And the very family that kind of erased my personality, erased my boldness, made me take care of them when I wanted to be taken care of and needed and should have been, were judging me. They were like, why don't you have confidence? I used to be, my God, my mom says that every 5 minutes. Used to be such a go-getter, right? But I got hacked. I got hacked because I not only had to coddle my father, but I had to coddle my mother on how she coddled him. And I realized, and I've said it before, I kind of enter very servanty into these relationships. And one of the red flags that I realized in looking at that relationship that totally reflects my father's relationship with my mom is that I really opened up his world to new things. And he ran off and he used it and he built himself. He made himself look more impressive. He made himself more inspired via the things that I showed him: movies, music, food. Because I just love to explore. I am adventurous. I love to know about the world. And he didn't deserve that because he was actually dull. I was the interesting one. And I didn't call him out, if you notice in the story. And I call them mild friends because I think for a lot of my life, I've had more, a lot of my friendships were deeper to me than they were to the person. A lot of my friendships were acquaintances that we shared likes and maybe we shared history, but we didn't share a heart. We didn't share depth. And that's why I didn't know how to describe them because part of what threw me off was here he was trying to impress people that, were just happy hour friends. Like this is not serious. And that that inability to tell an easy truth, which is, yeah, my girlfriend introduced me, I'm learning about them. It became this narrative, like the Odyssey, as written by Homer, of, yes, Kevin and I were solid friends, me and Kev Boo, you know. Um, and it's also erasing me. It's not only building a narrative, but building a narrative without me. Because even if it was that he knew about it beforehand, he could have just said that in the moment. Like, it was weird. And it was something my father would do. And my father claimed my mother introduced him to luxury because my father did not have taste. He was that guy that bought extremely expensive, ugly things. And you could see it in the cookie jar vase. And but what I found interesting is in the end, he became so obsessed with making her poor, making her feel poor, making her cry, making her feel she deserved her poverty. And he did that specifically to women, which is why, sometimes I'm like, okay, well, maybe my dad, when you know. Because it's something that I think about a lot. That kind of energy transfer, that destiny swapping. You don't even realize it, but even informing them of what you like is an energy transfer. And I feel like a lot, one of the things that I most hate about my childhood is that I was only loved when I made others feel loved. I was only appreciated by how I built others. And I'm a child developing. I'm the one who should be developed. But it's even something that happened today. My mother was like, I miss you because my, Apple Pay got disconnected and you would have hooked that up real quick. And I just felt this kind of dread. And it's the dread that a lot of people feel when they moved back home for a while and were living with a parent that saw them as, kind of indentured servitude or free slave labor. Like, I paid for my parents' love mentally and emotionally and physically. They paid, well, my father didn't. My mother paid financially. And I have found that in a lot of my relationships, I have, I think part of my resentment at giving so much creativity away, particularly to artistic exes, um, is that it's one of those things you can't necessarily, I think the obsession with telling people I paid for you. Of course I love you. I gave you a roof. I gave you money. I showed up because that was my father's thing. He had the bare minimum. I showed up. I showed up to abuse you, but I'm here. I think in looking back at a lot of my relationships, I hated that in the end I was devalued even to myself because in their perspective, you just introduced me to Tame Impala. You just introduced me to Led Zeppelin. You just introduced me to Almost Famous. You just wrote songs for me. You just, pushed me to go out for that job. You just build me in like spiritual, energetic ways, but you didn't pay my rent. You just gave me the idea that now pays my rent. It's almost like I was working in invisibility to be loved visibly. And I never was. And I realized that that was the root of why I kind of walked away really bitter from a lot of my male interactions because it's not just that you attract losers more because your father was a loser. You also accept and allow them because it's like you attract 15 losers and 5 good guys, but you're overwhelmed by the numbers and the personal history you have of accepting losers. So you ignore the 5 good guys, the 5 guys. And it was, he gaslit me with something, my father. It's always weird when abusive men act lighthearted because it just is such a weird, unnecessary lie. Why? Especially with randos. Like, we all were just there to have fun. Nobody was gonna isolate him from the bar if he didn't know Tame Impala. Nobody was kicking him out. And it was a red flag, I think, in perspective, because it's something my father did. And what was worse about my dad was that he ended up taking money from my mom, taking her mental health. And just because she introduced him to luxury, so he claimed. Yeah, he really did. She really did. My father did not have taste. He really didn't. And that energy transfer matters. Totally, totally matters. So, like I was talking with that podcaster, she was saying gatekeep. Don't show yourself so much. Because one of my mistakes is I've always thought interest meant invest. If they've shown interest in what you like or in you, then it means they're investing. And it's something that I mentioned in a prior episode called Aspen. I think it came out yesterday. I I think Yali, one of the hardest parts about bad breakups is that it could be bad for you, but it's not necessarily for them. You're doing better because you're loving yourself more in replacement to how they made you feel unlovable, but they're out in Aspen and they are skiing and meeting new women or meeting new partners. And it is a sign that they really weren't that invested, that despite how much you built them, they really thought you were overwhelming because at the end you asked for accountability and you asked for reciprocity. And these are things that you had to come in with from the beginning, asking, demanding, looking for, and you totally didn't. And it's so hard not to fall in those traps when that's your history, your personal history, your familial history. And it's something that makes now in perspective, as I raise my standards in dating, it almost scares me more because I have to maintain these rules. I cannot have another Mr. H. I can't, especially because kind of what I've spoken about this before. There are like studies and there are beliefs that men who cheat a lot and mistreat women are DLs. And it's something that sometimes I wondered, especially in terms of my own observances of my own sexuality, if that was my father, the case of my dad. And I spoke about that with my mom, who kind of had suspicions. It's so easy, and we call it bearding, how we use women to mask our hidden lives, our secret desires, our weirdness. Like I going back to the story, I just don't know why he couldn't say, I introduced him to Tame Impala. And it's the dumbest thing to mean you should more, you should move smarter. Because if they're willing to lie about something so stupid, it's only going to get worse. It's only going to get bigger. Yeah, weird. Weird. Check out daddyrecovery.com. Check out theandrewvitalall.com. Check out Howdy on all music platforms.